Hello, my name is George Ivanoff and I'm a children's author. So my most recently published book is The Human Body Survival Guide, the second book in the Survival Guides non-fiction series for kids. And it is all about how gross you actually are. Because, the human body, it's secretes and excretes all sorts of stuff, sweat and spit and spew and poo and wee and all sorts of gross stuff. And I thought that would be kind of fun to write about. Although, it does cover the other stuff, the cool stuff about the human body as well. So that is my latest book. The first in the Survival Guide series was the Australia Survival Guide, which is all about how Australia is trying to kill you with all of its dangerous animals and environment, everything from crocs and sharks to poisonous snakes and spiders and, deserts that you can dive thirsty in, bushland that you can get lost in, lots of ways to die in this country. Basically, I thought it would be fun to traumatize some tourists. So that's that book. So that was the first. The Human Body Survival Guide was the second, and there is a third on the way later this year. No, goodness me. No, I've had lots of books published. My very first came out way back in 1999. It was called Life, Death and Attention. It was a collection of short stories about life in high school, and it got a few nice reviews and then nobody bought it, and it kind of disappeared eventually. But since then I've had other books which have been a little bit more successful than that. The You Choose series has done quite well, and the Gamers Trilogy, and the Otherworld series, and the Royal Flying Doctor Service Adventures. There are also a bunch of educational books, but no one actually cares about those. Why do I write? 'Cause I like making stuff up. Well, that's one of the reasons. That's why I write fiction. Non-fiction because I like learning stuff. I love the research process, finding out about things that I hadn't previously known about. It's a lot of fun. Oh, writing in 2020 during the pandemic. Difficult. It's weird. People assume that with all that extra time, because you can't go anywhere, that you'd write more, when in fact I wrote less. There was this kind of underlying anxiety the entire year, and I wasn't sleeping properly, and I just found it really hard to concentrate. So the writing productivity went down. At the same time, I lost a lot of speaking work, obviously. It picked up a bit towards the end of the year because schools finally got their head around using Zoom and virtual visits and stuff. But I lost a lot of speaking, which gave me the time to catch up on the writing because everything was taking me twice as long to write. Yes, I do. I was part-time for many years because I used to have a real job, an office job, and I wrote part-time. And then when my wife and I had children, I became the stay-at-home parent. And that's when I pretty much decided I wanted to pursue writing as a career. So the deal was I'd be the stay-at-home parent, and I would spend all my spare time writing in an attempt to build up my career. And then once the kids started school, I would not go back to an office job. I would pursue writing full-time. And it worked. So I consider myself very lucky. So in 2020, I actually didn't do a huge amount of new book reading, new books that came out. But of those that did come out in 2020, the two that stood out for me were Euphoria Kids by Alison Evans. I think they are a fantastic writer. I've loved all their books, and Euphoria Kids was terrific. The other one was Battleborn by Amy Kaufman, the third book in the Elementals trilogy. I'm a huge fan of Amy's. I love her stuff, and that book was terrific. But in 2020, I also did a lot of research reading and a lot of reading of older books. And Certainly my favourite book out of all the old books that I read and reread in 2020 was War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. I'm a huge sci-fi fan, and that book really is one of the great sci-fi novels. And, I loved it as a kid, and I loved rereading it again last year. Oh, look, I actually read more children's and young adult fiction than I do adult fiction. And that's not just because I'm a children's writer, that's just how it is. I don't think I've ever completely grown up, and I've never completely stopped reading children's and young adult fiction. I read less adult fiction because I find that a lot of adult fiction bores the crap out of me. Children's and young adult fiction tends to get to the point a lot quicker. I have a limited attention span, and if things waffle too much and go off on tangents and stuff, I'm very easily distracted. So a lot of grown-up fiction tends to, not engage me as much. The exceptions are always like, full-on genre fiction. Like I can pick up a sci-fi book or a murder mystery and still be engaged by that. I love Agatha Christie. Every now and then I'll dig out an old Agatha Christie book and read or reread. She always manages to keep my attention. But yes, I have read a lot of grown-up fiction that has just not kept my attention. Whereas most of the children's and young adult fiction that I read, even if I don't love the book, it still manages to keep my attention. I don't know, that says something about me, which is probably not great, but there you go. I can remember the exact book that sparked off my interest in reading, because I spent many years being a reluctant reader when I was in primary school. And the book that changed it all was The Wonderful Flight to the Mushroom Planet by Eleanor Cameron, which I discovered quite by accident in about grade 4, I think. And it's what made me realize that it wasn't reading I disliked, it was the stuff people were giving me to read that I disliked. Didn't like all those school readers. Didn't like all that classic children's fiction that my parents were giving me. It turns out that what I liked was science fiction, and that was the first science fiction book that I read, and it sparked off the interest, and from there it eventually expanded. Once I realized that I liked reading, I eventually went from science fiction to other things as well, and read all sorts of stuff now. But that was the book that started it all off. It is the sort of story that is my favorite. The ordinary person put into extraordinary circumstances. So The Wonderful Flight to the Mushroom Planet is about two ordinary kids who suddenly get to go on a journey to another planet. And that's my favorite sort of story. My favorite film is E.T., the extraterrestrial. Ordinary kid put into extraordinary circumstances. And a lot of what I write is that. Certainly that was my actual deliberate approach with the You Choose books. So the You Choose books are interactive, and they put the reader into the story and put them into all sorts of extraordinary circumstances. But they all start off grounded in the real world, and an ordinary kid doing something ordinary, and then it becomes extraordinary. Love that sort of storytelling. Yes, the first stories that I wrote were really, really bad Doctor Who fan fiction, because I was kind of obsessed with the TV show I still am, if I may. I never go anywhere without a sonic screwdriver. Sad though that may be. Yes, so I wrote a lot of Doctor Who fan fiction, which thankfully only my poor family had to read. I didn't inflict it on anyone else. But, there you go. What's next for me? The next book that comes out is called Fear Frequency. It's only coming out in the UK from a publisher called Candy Jar. It's part of the Lethbridge Stewart series of books, which is a spin-off from Doctor Who. So I went into fanboy, overdrive, getting to write that book. It was like huge amounts of fun. So that's the very next book that comes out. Then after that is the third book in the Survival Guides series. So I'm working through edits at the moment. So I've got another week and a half worth of rewriting based on edits to go. And that will be out in October this year. It's called The Supernatural Survival Guide. And so it is about all those supposedly mysterious, unexplained things like ghosts and UFOs and cryptids, like Nessie and Bigfoot and Yeti and all of that sort of stuff. And about how there's a lot of misinformation around about all of that, and many of those things are not as unexplained as people think they are. Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this. It was really cool.